Hello, everyone. Uh, in this short video, we're going to introduce fatty acids. So we've covered all the sugars up to now. So we haven't seen anything else, actually. So it's time to see some other compounds. So let's see what they look like. But before we do that, we need to place them in our general scheme of biochemistry of all metabolism. So we're going to see where they fit into the scheme. And here we have seen that in our diet, we get reduced fuel. And reduced meaning rich in electrons. And we have covered sugars, as I said, and we're going to see later in subsequent videos how we take protein. And the topic of the next few videos has to do with fatty acids. These are the general classifications you more or less see at any food label. Whenever you go to the grocery store, you see the content in carbohydrates, i.e. sugars, protein, here shown as amino acids, and fat, okay? So again, this is our topic now. We're just going to focus on fat. So this video will just cover the overview with some definitions about fatty acids. So fatty acids are carboxylic acids, and they have a long hydrocarbon chain. And as the name implies, they have a terminal carboxyl group. So they, imagine a long carbon chain with a carbon with two oxygens at the very end. In terms of energy reserves, this is how everything is broken down if you do this kind of plot. And we've talked a lot about glycogen, but actually glycogen as a fraction of the total reserves that we have, how much ATP are we going to get if we break down, fat, protein, or glucose in the form of glycogen here. You see that actually glucose or glycogen is actually very small. It's a very small portion of the total. So you have a little bit of free glucose. You can barely see it as a shade here. And most of our carbohydrate reserves is in glycogen. But that, again, is a tiny, tiny fraction of the whole thing. This red part is actually protein in the muscle. So if we need it, we will break it down and break down our own protein and get amino acids. But the vast majority of our energy reserves is really stored in fat, shown here in this giant part of the whole pie. So why fat and not store our energy reserves in proteins or sugars? Well, as I said, they are reduced fuel. So these are the carbon chains, and that's a very short one with 6 carbons. That's another one with going a little bigger, 8 carbons. And that's the carboxyl group at the very end. So those are fatty acids. They're small in length. And if you compare those 6 carbons, carbon per carbon, let's say, of the fatty acid compared to the most famous sugar, a hexose that we have some glucose in this case. So you see that it is more reduced, okay? In sugars, every carbon has an oxygen on it. One of the carbons has to be a carbonyl group, but everything else also has a hydroxycarbon. Fatty acids, one carbon is very oxidized in the carboxy form, but everything else is almost is in the hydrocarbon state. And if you compare the 6 carbons with hexanes that we have in our gasoline or octanes here, you see it's getting almost close to that. Okay, so it's not as rich in electron as it is. The fatty acids are not as rich as hexanes or octanes, but they're getting there. More so, certainly, than glucose is. So one of the reasons is that they're reduced. And the second, why are they such good reserves, is because they're reduced, they have more electrons, and also they're less hydrated. And what that means is that they can pack in tighter spaces, so they occupy less space when you store them. They come into 2 broad categories, the fatty acids. That is, they can be saturated, which means they have as many protons as possible, so no double bonds. Or they can be unsaturated with 1 or more double bonds. Okay, the polyunsaturated fatty acids that we hear a lot about those in the diet, they have more than 1 double bond. So they will look something like this. Here's an 18 carbon fatty acid. which is rich in vegetable oils and olive oil. Those are the L-idic or the oleic acid, and they are monounsaturated, so they only have one double bond in the carbon chain. And whether that bond is in the trans or the cis configuration, that will give you different fatty acids. So the one in the trans configuration here is called the L-idic acid, and an oleic acid, this is the one that's actually very rich in olive oil, is in the cis configuration. Here in the brackets, you see the typical nomenclature. If it's a fully saturated fatty acid, let's say this one, 18 carbons. So the first number shows you the number of carbons, so that's 18%. And if there is no double bond, so fully saturated, you just write that, 0. Okay. So an 18-0 fatty acids, it's stearic acid, that's the name of it. It's very common in animal cells, as much as 30% of the total. Okay. And then the saturated, the mono unsaturated versions of this that are very common of the 18 carbons is, you can see this as L-idic acid or oleic acid. And again, after the number of carbons, you see the number of double bonds that you have. And in this case, you also indicate whether it's in the trans or the cis configuration, and the carbon at which and the position where the double bond is. In this case, at the 9th carbon. All right, so that concludes this short video, and we'll see how we mobilize these excellent energy reserves in the next video.